Everyone, thank you for joining this session of today's Artificial Intelligence Text Showcase. Before I hand it on over, just a reminder that we do have that Q&A box. Make sure to ask your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. And now I'm going to hand it on over to Caitlin and David with NetBase Quid.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. We're having some Wi-Fi issues, so we're going to go off camera. I'll just quickly say hi here so you guys see who I am, and then I'm going to go off. Next slide, please. All right. So I lead strategic growth, strategic sales at NetBase Quid. I'm an SVP here, and we bring new products to market based on some of our customer feedback. And we're going to be talking to you about some of the latest innovations at NetBase Quid that have just rolled out in the last part of 2022.
And I'm Caitlin Mayer. I'm a customer success strategist here at NetBase Quid. I've been working in the consumer and market intelligence space for over 7 years now. And here at NetBase Quid, I work with clients in an advisory capacity, both outside of and inside the platform to help them approach projects using the NetBase Quid suite of products.
Terrific. So what we're going to do today is give you a quick overview of the platform, and then we're going to do a specific use case around the alcoholic beverages and showcase how you use Quid and NetBase and the intelligence connector together to solve consumer market intelligence research questions. And then we'll leave a few minutes for questions. As Bridget said, if you have questions along the way, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end. So it's good to, while you're thinking of them, go ahead and put them in the chat. So NetBase and Quid came together 3 years ago. So we were separate companies. Each had a 10-year history of really good natural language processing AI capabilities, but we came at solving unstructured data analysis, consumer and market intelligence from two different perspectives. NetBase was focused on monitoring and alerting and looking at social data for the most part. And Quid was really a discovery engine, right? Looking at new clusters, new themes that might be emerging, or things that you may not know using what we call unsupervised machine learning. So you might put a topic of interest into Quid, and Quid would read the content, the underlying news articles or social data or companies or patent data, and identify themes that are emerging in certain conversations without you having to tell the system, go follow or track these specific things, right? You tell a broad category what to look at and its subsegments into smaller subsegments. NetBase is really then, once you know what you want to track, NetBase is really good at finding the data in social data across all social platforms, across news platforms now, right? And tracking and monitoring. We acquired a company called Rival IQ 2 years ago. Rival IQ's specialty is really in owned channel tracking, right? So if you have a client that's got 1,000 assets or 2,000 assets, maybe it's in the entertainment space and they've got TV characters and celebrities and other types of assets, and you want to understand how they're performing on owned channels versus competitors, maybe, that's where Rival IQ really thrives. So Quid and NetBase focus more on social data, blogs and forums, business data, which would be things like Cap IQ and Crunchbase data. So we do a lot of technology and market landscapes as well. And then global news from LexisNexis. We've got global news coverage, and we have about 50 languages that we read content in. So it's all unstructured data with some structured data associated with it, like social data. It might be a Facebook post where we're reading a comment about brand, but there might also be engagement data. So that might be the metadata associated with that we would also include. Or in business data, it might be a company profile that we're reading, right? The algorithm is reading and contextualizing, but there might be investment data and acquisition data associated with that company, which we would have as well. So it's the combination of segmenting based on the written, unstructured data, and then using the other metadata to help you get a really good research picture on what's happening. We also have the ability for you to upload your own data into the platform. So that could be anything from earnings call transcripts to product reviews to Yelp reviews. Anything that is unstructured data that you want to analyze at scale can easily be uploaded into the platform and read and contextualized. A lot of our customers said, we want all the metrics, all the analysis you're doing in your engine. We love working with it in the platform, but we also want to move it out of the platform like an API. So we built the intelligence connector last year, and the intelligence connector allows for rapid movement of data out of our platform at scale. So you might be tracking 15,000 brands and you're trying to understand brand sentiment, and you're trying to rank and prioritize those brands, or you're trying to look at risk and rank and prioritize that risk. The intelligence connector can move that data and do calculations on top of the insights to move the data out of the platform. Next slide, please. We talked about the data sets. I'll just go through this very quickly. We've got global social media. You can see breadth of data there. We've got market data. I talked about that. That's not only LexisNexis data, but also business data, companies, patents. We have patent filings, companies from Crunchbase and CapIQ, blogs and forums for more specific analysis, and for your own data. Let's jump into the detail. We can skip that. I can talk about Intelligence Connector a little later. So why don't we jump to your use case, Caitlin?
All right, sounds good. Thanks, David. So from here, we're going to walk you through how Quid, NetBase, and our Intelligence Connector can be used hand in hand in the process of uncovering, understanding, and then monitoring trends. To do this, we took a look at the beverage industry through a variety of lenses, starting with Quid's company dataset. Pulling data from Crunchbase and Capital IQ, Quid has access to millions of public and private company profiles. So within that data set, what we did is we went ahead and we ran a search for companies that mentioned alcoholic beverages such as beer, wine, rum, or vodka in their company description. And the resulting visualization, which is what we call a network, is what you see on your screen here. Each of these dots or nodes represents a company. As for their arrangement, what we're seeing here is the result of Quid performing unsupervised, unbiased clustering and mapping based on semantic similarities in the text of the company descriptions. Results are then grouped into sections we call clusters, each of which is represented with a different color. And so by leveraging Quid's AI, we're able to quickly generate a view in a matter of minutes rather than the hours or days it would take a person to hand code similar categorizations. Not only that, but by generating this view, we're able to pretty quickly get an overview of not just the top subsections of the industry, but also how they relate to one another. So the way we go about reading this isn't necessarily top to bottom or left to right, so much as examining the proximity and level of interconnectedness that these Quid identified clusters have with one another, as well as the proximity between the individual nodes within a given cluster. So as an example, we can see here right away at a high level that the bars and pubs cluster that's on the bottom left side of the screen over there is maybe not as similar to some of the companies that are clustered over on the opposite side of the network, and maybe aren't as central to the industry as the companies that are clustered in the center there. That said, we are able also to tell pretty quickly that there are some connections between the bars and pubs companies and craft beers. And then from there, craft beer companies are connected not just to bars and pubs, but also e-commerce. And once we have this network map and we look around for a little while and get an idea of categories and how they connect with each other, we can move on from this view and into some additional visualizations that Quid has that can help us identify broader trends in the industry using some additional metrics that the Quid company's dataset has. So as an example, what we're looking at here is a bar chart overview of private investments in the last 5 years into companies from the categories or clusters that Quid had identified on the previous slide, with each of these colors representing one of those clusters that we had been looking at. From this view, one immediate standout is investment in craft beer companies in 2019, and then a sharp drop-off in investments, not just in craft beer, but in alcoholic beverage companies overall in 2020. Knowing what we do about the year 2020, it isn't necessarily surprising to see that there was a drop-off in craft beer investments. It was a pretty challenging year for a lot of businesses, and craft brewers really struggled in a lot of ways that were both common to small businesses in the first leg of the pandemic, but also unique to the alcoholic beverage industry. With the closure of bars and restaurants at the start of the pandemic, a lot of craft brewers were really struggling to shift to packaging and distributing their beer to compete with larger players in the industry, especially due to challenges when there were shortages in aluminum cans due to increased demand, as well as carbon dioxide shortages as COVID-19 cut ethanol production. We also see that in that year of lower investment, the top category was e-commerce, getting investment, which matches overall shifts to e-commerce amid the pandemic across sectors. And while those findings aren't necessarily surprising to see in this context, it does help us validate these hypotheses that we may have come in with in a matter of minutes, once again taking full advantage of Quid's AI to drastically cut the time to insight as compared to if a person were to manually sift through this data. But moving on into 2021 and 2022, we can see investments rebounding, some in the craft beer space, but we also see substantial investment into tequila companies, that's that dark red category there, suggesting that that'll be a fun space to keep an eye on in the coming years. Now that we have a high-level understanding of the company landscape, though, let's move on to take a look and see how online conversations and news coverage look in relation to alcoholic beverages. On the next slides, we'll be looking at a Quid social network, which takes the principles we covered in the Quid Companies network and applies them to content that was found on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, and thousands of blogs, forums, and news sources. So what we're looking at here is another Quid network map relating to alcoholic beverages, this time using Quid social to analyze and then arrange posts from a representative sample of an original 250 million social media posts and news articles relating to alcoholic beverages posted between January of 2021 and December of 2022, identified via keyword search in NetBase, and then imported into Quid social for analysis. Of course, it would be impossible for one person to manually locate, much less read through and categorize 250 million social media posts and news articles in a timely fashion. But by using NetBase to search for this content and then bringing it over into Quid's unsupervised, unbiased clustering to create this network map, we can pretty quickly identify some of the top themes in conversation and coverage and how they relate to each other. So as an example, circled in the bottom over there, the dining experiences category is making up a pretty high share of discussion. And by its density, or how closely those individual dots or nodes sit to one another, we can conclude pretty quickly that the conversations in this cluster are pretty similar to one another. And not only that, but we see some pretty substantial overlap with the wine selection category. And we see that it's sitting pretty close to some of the other clusters around it, suggesting that they have some similarity as well. Moving on to a different area of the network map, though, at the top, we can see small but not insignificant cluster of discussion coming from social media users and journalists writing about not drinking alcohol. And we can infer from how this particular cluster is shaped that the conversation is more varied, with quite a bit of white space left between some of these nodes and sort of settling into a few key areas of concentration. So let's say that this is an area of interest that we've identified with Quid, and now we want to investigate further. Once we've used Quid Social to surface this conversational theme that we maybe hadn't previously been aware of, some additional questions we might be asking include, when is the conversation taking place? Is it something that was consistently discussed over the 2 years, or is it gaining or losing traction? And how do people feel about it overall, and has that shifted over time? In order to answer those questions, we can take this conversation theme and bring it back into NetBase for further analysis. If you'll recall, we did use the NetBase platform to surface these social media posts and news articles that we then ported into Quid Social to create a network map using a keyword-based search around alcoholic beverages. Now that we have a subset of discussion that we've identified and want to zoom in on, though, we can come back into NetBase and layer over search terms relating to not drinking or abstaining from alcohol. So what we're looking at here actually is a timeline of social media and news mentions relating to not drinking alcohol. Since our initial investigation in Quid Social told us that dry January was something to keep an eye out for, that was one of the clustered areas of discussion, we went ahead and bumped out our window of analysis to cover January of 2021 through mid-January of this year, or just over 2 years of data. We can see from a high level here that yes, there is some consistent conversation about abstaining from alcohol throughout the year, with the subject getting a ballpark of 100,000 to 150,000 mentions in most months. In the last few years, though, there has been a pretty substantial jump each January, coinciding with that dry January trend that we identified in the not drinking cluster in Quid. And using the NetBase platform, we can pretty quickly identify some of the top posts and conversation drivers from each of these time periods to get a sense of really what people were talking about at those points in time. As a few examples, in January of 2021, we saw a sparkling water brand posting a mocktail recipe using their product. In 2022, we saw magazines talking about how dry January can be difficult to stick to and some tips and tricks for people who are thinking of giving it a try. And then finally, this year, we saw makers of alcoholic beverages getting in on the discussion, including this Tito's vodka ad with Martha Stewart. Coming back to the trend line, though, we can also see that sentiment has gotten a little bit less positive with each passing January. The purple line here represents net sentiment, which is a score that NetBase calculates automatically to express the ratio of positive to negative sentiment in a range from negative 100 to 100. Abstaining from alcohol is hovering at about 25% this January, so it's more positive than negative, but it's still a decline from 30% last January and 35% in January of 2021. Beyond simply assigning a sentiment score, though, NetBase's AI can isolate sentiment and what it's directed towards, providing some pretty specific context that can be used not just to identify whether the discussion around a subject is positive or negative, but what those drivers of positive and negative discussion are. So now that we have an understanding of how the conversation has trended over time, let's zoom in to take a look at what some of those key sentiment drivers were at a particular moment in time. In this case, January of 2022, and that'll help us identify the underlying causes of that 30% net sentiment that we saw for the month. So what we're looking at here is a sentiment word cloud that shows us the top attributes driving positive sentiment in green and negative in red. The larger the word is, the more mentions it got in that positive or negative context. So at a high level, we can pretty quickly tell that health is a key reason why somebody might be talking about not drinking in a positive light, with similar considerations like helping their body feel better or other benefits contributing to their overall favorable view. Meanwhile, we can also pretty quickly tell that the negative conversations often speak to the difficulty of making a lifestyle change, especially after a stressful period in time, or people experiencing withdrawals or having previously failed at this effort. But now that we've taken a look at all of that, I'll hand it back over to David to talk about the intelligence connector and how it can be used to gain further insight.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. So as I started to mention earlier, the intelligence connector was originally built to move data out of the platform, right? You can imagine if you're mixing data with sales data or inventory data or other kinds of metrics and you're using BI tools, you want to move the data out. So we built intelligence connector to do that. But upon doing that, we realized it was much more capable than just simply moving data out. We actually built use cases on top of that involved high amounts of data processing. So a lot of our researchers came to us and said, what if we have all these different variables, right, that we're seeing in a given market? So take the beverage space. Maybe we've got alcoholic beverages, we've got non-alcoholic, we've got dairy-free. And then we have all these other factors we're looking at, like the health benefits or energy benefits, right? We've got different variables. And marketers and market researchers always want to understand how these variables are connected to each other and where the trends are going. So we built something called trends versus fads. And our AI team actually built a statistical model that lays on top of the data to help determine if a combination of variables or factors, in fact, is a trend or a fad. Next slide, please. So in this particular use case that we're about to show you, you would start with Quid, right, to understand potential trends, right, candidate trends that might be appearing in a conversation. And you saw a number of them in the alcoholic beverage conversation. And then we would create themes in base, right? And these are themes we want to track. So once we have our candidate themes, we identify ones we want to track, and we put them into Quid to continue, or NetBase to continuously monitor. And we then built a statistical model that continuously reads the content and groups potential trends into a category called steady, emerging, fad, or noise. Okay. And then the intelligence connector, reading the content about that, continuously ranks and prioritizes which combination of factors are steady trends, emerging trends, fads, or noise. And then you can, once you see those ranked, you can dig back into the tool to see the underlying posts to help you validate or contextualize those trends. Next slide. This is just an overview of what the digital signature looks like for any of these trends or a potential signature, right? So they have to fit a certain profile. And we have not to get too deep into the weeds, but we have 4 statistical tests that the data runs through. And if it passes a certain test, then it's a fad. If it passes 2 or 3 tests, it's a steady trend, and so on. And the team worked very hard to kind of refine this with a number of our early clients. And so we now have this in market, in field, where any topic you're looking at, we can categorize as something a steady trend, a fad, a noise, etc. Next slide, please. And how that's manifested is in a dashboard like something like this, right? So imagine we're reading content about any topic you care about. It's going through decision tree, statistical analysis in the intelligence connector to determine if it's a trend or a fad. And it's getting pushed into a BI tool to display like this. And so you can see the different themes here, craft beer, bourbon, or whiskey. Imagine you're tracking those. And we can look at this over different time periods, like a 30-day, 90-day, 180-day period. And we actually come up with an overall score, an emerging score, a steady score, et cetera. And we continuously rank which of these are steady, emerging, fad, noise, and we provide the theme, the topic, and the link. You could do this against multiple categories of themes and multiple categories of topics. So, in fact, alcoholic beverages might just be one of 10 different topics you're looking at. These themes here, craft beer, bourbon, whiskey, et cetera, might be, you might have themes for each category of beverages. These are just the alcoholic beverages. So we're just showing you a small snapshot. And once you see, okay, the highest score is craft beer, steady trend over a 90-day period, and it's got the highest score, you can click on the link and it'll take you to NetBase and the underlying data associated with that specific trend, and you can really get the context on how that actually works. And we're actually developing something called Discover Unknown. So you saw Quid, and I saw there was a question in the chat. We're developing something that can discover potential candidate themes in real time. So Quid is a bit static in that you do the analysis and you can see it and you can look back, but imagine having something continuously looking for potential trends in the alcoholic space. And then you can say, yeah, this looks like an interesting new trend. I'm going to put it in trends and fads to monitor and see if it moves up to the top over time. So we're really excited about this. This is one of about 7 or 8 use cases the intelligence connector has enabled. We're doing things like risk analysis, supply chain reputation risk. We're doing things like technology ranking, technology scouting, innovation scouting. We're doing brand and competitive analysis and intelligence connector. Anything you need to rank and prioritize in real time, and with custom weightings and custom metrics is exactly what we're getting at. So why don't we pause? I know we wanted to leave 5 minutes for questions. Why don't we open up to questions? I think there were a few in the chat that I answered, but are there any new ones? We can go there. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Otherwise, I think, Bridget, you have.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do have questions. So some newer questions that you didn't get a chance to getting around to was regarding social. Is there access to new platforms like TikTok?
Caitlin, you want to handle that or?
Yeah, I can take that. So we do have access to some TikTok data. It's currently segmented out separately and is limited to top authors and hashtags. So it's really great for identifying trends at a high level. Definitely working to get access to the full stream of data and always updating.
Great, thank you. Can you do this trend versus fad analysis on any category or industry?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, can you do this trend versus fad analysis on any category or industry?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. So, when you craft beer, any topic, any industry that you're looking at, you can do this on. So it's not limited to one industry or another. And there's the flexibility to change weightings, right? So if in one industry, certain themes are more important than others, you can weight those higher. So there is a lot of flexibility that we give the client in customizing the weightings and customizing the duration based on the industry they're looking at. But yeah, we have this in the confectionery industry, the beverage industry, the healthcare industry. So it's really industry agnostic.
That's great. And how do you read the posts and news stories that are in a Quid network?
Sure, I can take that. There's actually a few different ways. In the Quid platform, the networks that we were looking at are actually fully clickable. So you can click on a cluster name and it'll actually surface the text from a few key top examples within that cluster. There's also a side pane which will show you the top keywords associated with each cluster. And you can actually toggle to a list of social media posts or news story examples from there. You can also click on any individual node or dot in the network, and it'll give you the associated text of that post or story. I do also want to call out the visualizations in NetBase are clickable as well. So as an example, that sentiment driver word cloud that we looked at earlier, if we were viewing that in the NetBase platform, you would actually be able to click on any of those words or phrases and get a list of the social posts or news stories where that term was a positive or negative sentiment driver.
Awesome. And we have time for one more question. Is there a way to cross the streams and see if or how news is in relations to the social conversations?
Um, yeah, I'll just rephrase that really quick and make sure that I'm getting at the question that you're wondering. So, are you essentially asking then if there's a way to separate out the different sources of information, like say news articles and social media posts, and look at them in comparison to each other? Oh, I see NetBase News and NetBase Social. Got it. So NetBase does have news and social all in one place, but you do have the ability to select and either filter down and look at social media sources, or if you want to just look at news sources, then you can do that as well, either combined or separately, and you can compare them to each other as well if you'd like.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers for sharing all this great information. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. We will see you in our next and final session of the day. Thank you.